Before we come to the urgent question, I should say to the House that I have noted media reports of the assertion from Downing Street that the pre-announcement of the budget measures is entirely routine. For avoidance of doubt, I'm always happy for ministers to come to the House in the run-up to the budget to make announcements. This discourtesy arises when those announcements are made elsewhere. So I now come to the urgent question. Laura Trott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Minister if he will make a statement on whether ministers disclosing policies to the media before the budget are in contravention of the Ministerial Code statement that the most important announcements of government policy should be made, in the first instance, in Parliament.
Yes. Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I just reassure you, Mr. Speaker, that what you said yesterday, and indeed what you said today, a moment or two ago, has been heard not just by me, but right across government as well. The government takes its obligations to this House very seriously. Yesterday, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury made a statement to the House on the fiscal rules. And in that statement, he made clear that details will be announced to the House in the Chancellor's budget statement tomorrow, alongside an economic and fiscal forecast produced by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Treasury Ministers have also answered questions in this House this morning. Tomorrow, the Chancellor will come before the House to set out in detail the government's budget to fix the foundations of our economy. And then the House will have a further 4 days of debate on the measures announced in that budget. Throughout it all, Mr. Speaker, members of this House will see a government committed to fixing the foundations to deliver the change our country so desperately needs. This Labour government will invest in Britain's future so we can rebuild the NHS, rebuild our country, whilst ensuring working people don't face higher taxes in their pay slips.
Madam Minister Laura Trott.
Mr. Speaker, the response from Number 10 yesterday seemed to be that their whole argument is, we did it because you guys did it. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm old enough to remember a fresh-faced Prime Minister coming into Downing Street promising change. Justifying their action based on things that we've done doesn't really seem like the change that we were promised, now does it? Mr. Speaker, we are learning the lessons of why we lost the election, but this government seems to be taking lessons from the worst bits of our record. And not just ours, the last Labour government too. It's like the greatest hits of government mistakes being replayed in just 100 days. Cronyism? Is it Blair? No. It's the fresh-faced Labour government giving civil service jobs to donors. A gross betrayal of pensioners. Is it Brown? No. It's the new Chancellor deciding that those on £13,000 are rich and don't need their winter fuel payments. Rampant politicisation of our institutions. Was this something they'd accused Boris Johnson of? Mr. Speaker, no. It's the Chancellor again saying this weekend that the ex-Prime Minister and Chancellor will have to answer to the OBR, despite the OBR saying that the report has nothing to do with previous ministers and led Times to argue that the OBR has been reduced to, and I quote, the provisional wing of the Treasury Press Office. Disrespectful statements emanating from Number 10 about your decisions, Mr. Speaker. Not us, but the Number 10 Press Office just yesterday. And potentially breaching the Ministerial Code with abandon about budget leaks. Right again, it's this government. Their false piety has been breached so comprehensively by the Downing Street parcel scandal and crony appointments to the civil service. Their hypocrisy has been laid bare for all to see. Yet still, they bleat on about the Tories like some broken spell they try to mutter over and over again in an attempt to conjure up the old magic. But it's not going to work. Labour are so obsessed with playing political games that they find themselves, Mr. Speaker, going into the budget simultaneously claiming that the Conservatives spent too much, but they also spent too little. It's nonsense. So, Mr. Speaker, the question that I want to ask the opposition today is who is going to take responsibility for the budget leaks and what assessment have they made of whether this is a breach of the Ministerial Code?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, I have deep respect for this House and its members, and the coming days will be very important to debate the budget in full. But I'm sure honourable and right honourable members will forgive me if I have a degree of cynicism about the party opposite's newfound passion for parliamentary conventions, given the number of times they failed in their 14 years in office to update the House ahead of major announcements. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservative Party are desperate to speak about nothing other than the appalling mess they left our national finances in. And, Mr. Speaker, there are many groups of people I would listen to on budget management, but certainly not the party that crashed the economy. And you'd think they'd have learned some lessons from attacking independent financial institutions, but they haven't. The Shadow Chancellor and the Chief Secretary attacking the Office for Budget Responsibility once again. And, Mr. Speaker, families in my constituency and across the country are still paying higher rents and mortgage costs because of the mini-budget 2 years ago that created and wreaked such havoc on our economy. And unlike the party opposite, this government will never play fast and loose with the nation's finances. Tomorrow we will see a budget focused on investment to get the economy moving again. This government will take the long-term decisions needed to rebuild Britain, fix our schools, our hospitals and our broken roads. The Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, have not changed. All they offer is decline and more austerity, with working people paying the price.
James Frith.
Speaker, in Bury North, rents and mortgages are still sky high as a direct consequence of the economic legacy of the last Conservative government. It's no surprise to me that they want to talk about anything other than their economic record. Does the Minister agree?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly do agree, but it was, and I'm sure it will come as a surprise to honourable and right honourable members, that one of their former chancellors did decide to comment on the 2022 fiasco that September. And what did Kwasi Kwarteng say the other day? OK, my budget wasn't perfect. Master of understatement, I think.
Spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a sad state of affairs when the run-up to the budget of this new government so closely resembles that of the previous government, with consistent leaks and briefings to the media rather than announcements being made where they should be in this House, so that members can scrutinise them on behalf of their constituents. The previous Conservative government did so much damage to trust in politics, including by consistently undermining the Ministerial Code. So will the Minister put things right and toughen up the status of the Code by enshrining it in law?
Mr. Speaker, we've already said the Prime Minister will publish an updated Ministerial Code shortly, but there is a very stark difference between this administration and the previous one. The approach of the previous one is probably best characterised as if you break the rules, try and change the rule book. But we on this House take the Ministerial Code seriously. And that is why we want to ensure it is fit for purpose, deal with problems like the Tory freebie loophole, and meet the high standards the Prime Minister expects from all who have the privilege of serving in his government.
Laurence Turner.
And I'm sure the whole House will welcome the constructive response from the Minister today. Will he confirm that the former Conservative Treasury front bench had to have Section 9.1 of the Ministerial Code drawn to its attention twice in April and May this year? It is do as they say, not do as they did.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and frankly, when you hear the party opposite talk about ethics and standards in government, I thought irony had died.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we take it that the government doesn't think that the announcement the Chancellor made last week in America was an important announcement? Because I think most people in this House think it was a very important announcement, and therefore, if it was a very important announcement, did the Chancellor break the Ministerial Code?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury made a statement to the House yesterday. The entire Treasury team have been here answering questions today. The Chancellor will deliver a budget tomorrow. We will have 4 days of debate. I doubt the House has seen so much of the Treasury team since the Tories were forced to deliver 2 emergency budgets in September 2022.
Louise Jones.
My constituents in North East Derbyshire are still paying the price with the rises to their mortgages and rents caused by the mini-budget. Does the Minister agree with me that the Conservatives should be talking about this and holding themselves to account rather than just throwing out chaff to distract everyone?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And in the Shadow Chief Secretary's contribution, there was one word that was noticeably missing. Sorry.
Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In the last Parliament, as Chair of the Procedure Committee, I made a point of making sure that when ministers had breached the rules, it was very clear to them that the Procedure Committee and others were very unhappy. Can he confirm that he will make sure that the revised Ministerial Code will make sure that announcements need to be made to this place first, as has always been the case?
Well, with great respect to the Honourable Lady, the Right Honourable Lady, she won't have long to wait for the Ministerial Code, but I've already, in my opening remarks to Mr Speaker, indicated my respect for this House in regard to the matter she's talking about.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The chutzpah from the party opposite is quite incredible. They make a point today about process, and yet they totally ignored the OBR ahead of the disastrous mini-budget, which is still causing immense pain for my constituents. I'd like to know whether the Minister agrees with that.
Absolutely. And is it any surprise that you have a Conservative Party that wants to talk about process? They will not take responsibility for the £22 billion black hole they left in our financing.
Sir Julian.
Mr Speaker, yesterday you made the strongest statement of condemnation on a subject of this sort that I've heard from the Chair in 27 years in this House. The Minister is a decent chap, and for all I know, he may be a skilled cricketer, but he must admit that he is batting on a sticky wicket today. Does he understand that if his defence is just to say, we did it because the previous party did it, nobody is ever going to break this cycle? His party has got a big majority. They could just say sorry and resolve to do better in the future.
Minister.
I'd say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he does have a great deal of respect for him. I'm not a cricketer, as it happens, so can't comment on the condition of the wicket. But with regard to Mr Speaker, I did set out initially in my remarks to the House today my respect both for Mr Speaker, what he said both yesterday and indeed today, and my respect for members of this House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think we all understand that the Conservative Party are desperate to talk about anything other than their record of 14 years in government, 14 years of failure, and we can hear from honourable friends and members opposite as well how those failures are affecting constituents every single day. My question would be, Mr Speaker, what next? How are they going to distract us next?
My right honourable friend is entirely right about the desire of the party opposite to distract from their record. Whether it is the lockdown parties or indeed the PPE VIP lane for contracts, what this government is doing is appointing a COVID corruption commissioner to get the public's money back.
Brendan O'Hara.
Those of us who have been in this place for some time will remember the outraged indignation of the now government when they were in opposition, and every time the now opposition pulled a stunt like this. The only constant, Mr Speaker, is you and your efforts to have that, whatever one of them happens to be in power, treat this House and its members with respect. Can't the Minister see that the government displaying such arrogant contempt for the rules only feeds that public perception that one is as bad as the other? And rather than the change it promised, the Labour Party is really saying it's our turn now.
Exactly.
The Right Honourable Gentleman can't possibly be saying there's any comparison with breaching the rules during the COVID pandemic. He really can't. That's not a serious proposition, nor is it a serious proposition that it's comparable with the money that was lost in the PPE VIP lane. It really isn't.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that despite the rumours that have been spread, including many by the party opposite, that not a single change to taxation has yet been announced and will in fact be announced in the budget tomorrow?
Tomorrow, as my honourable friend says, the measures will be announced to the budget in the normal way. With the Office for Budget Responsibilities, Economic and Fiscal Forecast, the party opposite may denigrate the Office of Budget Responsibility, but this government respects our financial institutions.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Paymaster General confirm that for the Chancellor to receive £7,500 in free clothes and to declare them as office support is a breach of the Ministerial Code?
I have to say, Mr Speaker, the party opposite have learned absolutely nothing. They trashed ministerial standards and standards in this House in government. Mr Shannon, you meant to sit down. They trashed standards in government, and my suggestion to them is to reflect on the past 14 years.
Sam Cole.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very grateful to several members opposite there for admitting quite a lot of the mistakes they were making in government. People in my constituency are still paying the price in their mortgages and rents from the disastrous Conservative economic record. Is it any wonder that the party opposite are desperate to speak about anything other than their disastrous record?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. They will talk about anything but their own record. Is it any wonder, Mr. Speaker, they did not conduct a spending review before they called a general election? The reality is they made unfunded spending commitments and then they ran away.
Sir Christopher Chope.
One of the remits of the new modernisation committee is to enhance the ability of members of this House to hold the government to account. So, in light of the failure that's been exhibited over recent days, would the Minister be in favour of referring this issue to the Modernisation Committee?
Well, I wasn't aware, Mr. Speaker, that the financial mismanagement of the party opposite was a matter for the Modernisation Committee, but certainly it should be referred to something.
George Simons.
Mr. Speaker, I, like others, have to say I'm surprised to hear the members opposite recently rediscover their moral compass. The one they lost, perhaps, when the former Prime Minister sent a BYOB invite to Downing Street, or spent taxpayer money jetting his girlfriend around the world, or when they unlawfully suspended this place. Perhaps the Minister agrees with me there might be another motivation. Does the member for Sevenoaks want to keep her job next week?
Well, of course, we wish her well. We wish her well for the reshuffle next week, of course, Mr. Speaker. But my honourable friend makes, as ever, a very persuasive point. They will talk about anything apart from their record.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At 10 p.m. last night, the government announced a £70 million increase in funding for radiotherapy. Now, I, as the chair of the all-party group on radiotherapy, clearly very much welcomed that. But, Mr. Speaker, wouldn't it have been better and right for them to come to this House, make a statement, so that it could have been properly scrutinised? Because £70 million equals about 30 linear accelerators. It takes 70 linear accelerators just to replace the ones that are going out of date this year and will not meet the needs of people living in rural communities like mine who desperately need a satellite radiotherapy unit in Kendal so they can get to treatment quickly. Would the Paymaster General put this lack of scrutiny right by arranging for a health minister to meet with myself and the rest of the all-party group so we can take forward these plans and work closely together?
I'll certainly pass on that request to the Health Minister, and even putting aside the point he makes about scrutiny, I'm sure the honourable gentleman would join us in welcoming the focus that there should be on radiotherapy, and I'm sure there'll be a real desire to work across party lines with him on that.
Kevin Bonovia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was elected on a manifesto in May to keep the promises made in that manifesto. However, the party opposite broke nearly every promise they made in the last 14 years in government. Does the Minister agree with me that it was only right for this government to confirm that it will honour the pledges it made at the election?
He's absolutely right, and of the many things that the Conservative government over 14 years destroyed, trust, I'm afraid, was one of them, something this government's determined to rebuild.
James Watt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had the Chancellor, the Education Secretary, the Health Secretary, the Work and Pension Secretary all making significant announcements to the media, not to this House. So will those breaches of the Ministerial Code be investigated? And why has the Prime Minister not yet published an updated version of the Ministerial Code? Are they still working out whether it's right to accept suits and glasses?
We've already said that the Prime Minister will update the Ministerial Code and publish it shortly, and it's making sure that it is fit for purpose, dealing with problems, as I've said, like the Tory freebie loophole, and that it meets the high standards the Prime Minister expects.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We hear a lot about 14 years of failure, but it seems to me this government has had 14 years to learn how the Ministerial Code works. And the reality is that the announcement made by the Chancellor last week, it moved the markets. Bond yields went up, which means mortgages went up, which means that people's bills have gone up. I think the right thing for the government to do, Mr. Speaker, is to apologise.
Well, I would say to the honourable gentleman, first of all, in terms of the impact of what the Chancellor announces, we will see that tomorrow and in the days afterwards. But we will see the Ministerial Code published shortly, and it is in stark contrast to what the previous government did. I, on those opposition benches, watched them try and tear up the entire rulebook to try and protect one of their friends, something we will not do.
Graham Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, I think you will have been as disappointed as I was that the Chancellor came to the Chamber this morning for Treasury questions, and after your statement yesterday, sir, she failed to apologise to the House for the announcements that have been made, serious and important announcements, as various colleagues have mentioned, outside of this House. Yeah. Will the Minister promise now, without talking about the previous government's record, will he promise now that the Ministerial Code will be respected in future, that the Speaker of this House, who represents all of us, will be respected by this government, and he won't seek to deflect any further by talking about the Tory record?
Of course, this government respects both, Mr. Speaker, and indeed the Ministerial Code, but I make no apology whatsoever for holding the party opposite to account for their record.
Alan Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The party opposite have a full outrage and a complete amnesia for the series of egregious failures when they were in government that mean people in my constituency of Central Ayrshire are still paying the price for their failures. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we need to look at the future that this government can bring to people in Central Ayrshire? Sorry.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we saw only in recent weeks the investment summit. This government, an active government, getting pledges of £63 billion of investment to our economy. Much better record already than the Conservative government under which investment was in decline.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd first like to declare my interest as a governor of the Royal Berkshire Hospital, and that I have a family member who has a shareholding in a health company. Yesterday, I asked the Minister if he would commit to urgently funding the Royal Berkshire Hospital, and was told very politely to wait for Wednesday's budget. Does the Minister agree with me that there is a democratic deficit when elected MPs can't get an answer on issues that affect their constituents, yet at the same time, details of the budget are being briefed to the press?
Mr. Speaker, there are a range of ways for him to get answers for his constituents, from written parliamentary question to indeed getting a debate in Westminster Hall or an adjournment debate, and he will not have long to wait now for the budget, and indeed 4 days of debate afterwards to raise that very point.
Jim Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I say this very gently to the Minister, but I say it because it has to be said. Mr. Speaker has been very clear, painfully clear throughout his term as Speaker, that there is a procedure for this House, and that is one which we must all follow. Does the Minister not agree that this government that have come to power on a mandate of doing things the right way must pay that respect to the convention of this House which is in place, not simply due to tradition, but to ensure that policy changes are heard and debated here first, which is the purpose of this House, rather than heard and debated in TV studios throughout the country with a simple nod in the direction of discourse of democracy? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I have huge respect for this House, and indeed, the honourable gentleman, I think, is a frequent contributor to this House. And what I would say is that the government's respect for the Ministerial Code, for Mr. Speaker, and for members of this House is absolute.
Dr. Luca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, over the last few days, we've had multiple leaked definitions of what working people are. So could I ask the Minister if they place in the House of Commons library a definition ready for tomorrow's budget so we can all understand who they're talking about?
Tell him exactly about working people, Mr. Speaker. Working people are the people who've been so appallingly let down by the party opposite. They are the people who are paying extra costs in their mortgages and their rents every month. They are the people hit by the cost of living. They are the people left on record waiting lists by the party opposite. And they are the people this government is determined to deliver for.
We now come to Paul Holmes.
And there was I ready to defend Your Honour, sir, because even after your Speaker's ruling yesterday, sir, the government made more announcements on the BBC this morning concerning health services. So can I ask the Paymaster General whether he has asked the advice of his advisers at the Cabinet Office to do with the Ministerial Code, whether he thinks that the Chancellor or any other minister has broken the Ministerial Code, and if he hasn't asked for that advice, why hasn't he?
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I mean, come on, the party opposite, which showed zero respect for the Ministerial Code in office, trying to put questions like that. It really is appalling. It is double standards.
Expect better from a senior whip. Right, that completes that urgent question.